The October morning arrived in Manhattan with the kind of cold that seeps through expensive coats and settles into bones. A thin mist hung over the streets surrounding the Thurgood Marshall United States Courthouse, where dozens of news vans had claimed every available parking space since before dawn. Reporters clutched steaming coffee cups, their breath visible in the crisp air as they practiced their opening lines for cameras that would soon broadcast this trial to millions of viewers across the nation. Inside the imposing granite building, the halls echoed with the measured footsteps of federal agents, attorneys in tailored suits, and curious citizens who had lined up hours earlier for a chance to witness what the media had already labeled the trial of the decade. The case of United States versus Lorenzo Vitale had dominated headlines for 8 months. Ever since federal prosecutors announced they had finally gathered enough evidence to bring down one of New York's most enigmatic figures. Courtroom 15A sat on the building's 8th floor, a space designed to intimidate with its high ceilings, dark wood paneling, and the imposing bench where Judge Catherine Morrison would preside. By 8:30 in the morning, every seat in the gallery was occupied. Federal agents in dark suits lined the walls, their expressions carefully neutral. In the front row, journalists from the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and major television networks had their notebooks ready, pens poised to capture every significant moment. Lorenzo Vitale entered the courtroom at exactly 8:47 a.m., flanked by his defense attorney, Robert Chen, a man whose reputation for defending difficult cases was matched only by his astronomical hourly rate. Lorenzo moved with the kind of calm that comes from either absolute confidence or complete resignation. It was impossible to tell which. At 38 years old, he carried himself with a presence that made people instinctively step aside. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, his dark hair neatly combed back, and his face revealed nothing of the thoughts behind those observant brown eyes. He took his seat at the defense table without glancing at the packed gallery behind him, though he could feel the weight of dozens of stares burning into his back. Lorenzo had spent enough years navigating dangerous situations to know that showing fear or uncertainty was an invitation for others to exploit. So he sat perfectly still, hands folded on the polished oak table, and waited. Assistant U.S. Attorney David Hartman sat at the prosecution table, reviewing his notes with the satisfied air of a man who knows he holds all the winning cards. At 49, Hartman had built his career on high-profile convictions, each one adding another brick to his reputation as the prosecutor who never lost. His salt and pepper hair was styled impeccably, his American flag pin positioned perfectly on his lapel. He'd told reporters outside the courthouse that morning that justice would finally be served, that no one was above the law, that this trial would send a clear message to organized criminal enterprises operating in New York. "All rise," the bailiff announced, as Judge Morrison entered from her chambers. She was a woman in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Her reputation for running an efficient, no-nonsense courtroom preceded her. Everyone in the room understood that theatrics and emotional appeals would find no purchase here. Only evidence and law mattered to Judge Morrison. The preliminary proceedings moved with bureaucratic efficiency. The charges were read aloud, each one carrying the potential for decades in federal prison: racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to commit financial fraud, obstruction of justice. The words hung in the air like accusations written in stone. Lorenzo's attorney, Robert Chen, stood to enter the plea they'd already filed weeks ago. "Not guilty on all counts, Your Honor." His voice carried the confidence of a man who'd defended similar cases dozens of times before, though those close to him knew this case presented unique challenges. The prosecution's evidence was substantial, detailed, and apparently damning. "The prosecution may present its opening statement," Judge Morrison said, settling into her chair with the air of someone preparing for a long day. David Hartman rose, buttoning his suit jacket as he approached the jury box. 12 citizens, 7 women and 5 men, ranging in age from 25 to 68, watched him with expressions of curiosity and civic duty. Hartman had spent weeks selecting this jury, ensuring each member met his exacting standards for cases of this magnitude. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Hartman began, his voice measured and authoritative, "over the next several days the United States will present irrefutable evidence that the defendant, Lorenzo Vitale, has spent the last decade building a criminal enterprise designed to enrich himself through illegal means while hiding behind a facade of legitimate business operations." He walked slowly along the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. We will show you financial records that trace millions of dollars through shell companies and offshore accounts. We will present testimony from individuals who worked directly with Mr. Vitale and witnessed his criminal activities firsthand. We will introduce surveillance evidence, recorded conversations, and documentation that proves, beyond any reasonable doubt, that Lorenzo Vitale is guilty of every charge brought against him. Hartman paused for effect, turning to look directly at Lorenzo. The defendant wants you to believe he's merely a successful businessman, an entrepreneur who built his import company through hard work and smart decisions. But the evidence will reveal the truth, that his legitimate businesses serve as nothing more than elaborate covers for criminal operations that have enriched him at the expense of law-abiding citizens and legitimate businesses forced to compete against his illegal advantages. For the next 40 minutes, Hartman laid out the prosecution's case with the precision of a master craftsman. He referenced specific dates, locations, and transactions. He previewed testimony from witnesses who would describe meetings, conversations, and activities that appeared to form an undeniable pattern of criminal behavior. He presented a timeline that seemed to account for Lorenzo's every movement during the relevant period. The courtroom remained absolutely silent except for Hartman's voice and the occasional scratch of pens as journalists took notes. Lorenzo sat motionless throughout the entire presentation, his expression never changing, his posture never shifting. To observers, he appeared almost disconnected from the proceedings, as if Hartman were describing someone else's life entirely. When Hartman finally concluded with a dramatic promise that justice would be served, he returned to his seat with the satisfied look of an attorney who knows he's just delivered a devastating blow. Robert Chen's opening statement took a different approach. Rather than matching Hartman's dramatic flair, he spoke in calm, measured tones that suggested quiet confidence. Members of the jury, my client Lorenzo Vitale has spent 15 years building successful import businesses that employ over 200 people in the New York area. His companies pay taxes, follow regulations, and contribute to the economic vitality of our city. The prosecution would have you believe that this success is somehow evidence of criminal activity, that achievement itself is suspicious. Chen walked toward the jury box, his hands clasped behind his back. Over the course of this trial, we will demonstrate that the government's case is built on circumstantial evidence, questionable interpretations of legitimate business activities, and testimony from individuals who have their own reasons for wanting to see Mr. Vitale convicted. We will show that every transaction, every meeting, every business decision the prosecution characterizes as criminal was, in fact, entirely legal and properly documented. He paused, letting his words sink in. The burden of proof rests entirely with the prosecution. They must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Not beyond possible doubt, but reasonable doubt. And as you hear the evidence, as you see the gaps in their case, and the alternative explanations for the activities they describe, I'm confident you will find that reasonable doubt not only exists, but pervades every aspect of their theory. The first 2 days of trial proceeded exactly as Hartman had promised. He called financial experts who walked the jury through complex transaction records, using charts and graphs projected onto screens to illustrate the flow of money through various accounts and companies. The testimony was dry and technical, but Hartman had a gift for making financial crimes understandable to laypeople. You see here, one expert explained, pointing to a colorful diagram. A payment of $847,000 entered this account in the Cayman Islands on June 3rd. Within 72 hours, that money had been divided and transferred to 6 different accounts in 3 countries. This is a classic money laundering pattern designed to obscure the origin and destination of funds. Chen cross-examined each witness methodically, pointing out alternative explanations, questioning assumptions, and highlighting the lack of direct evidence connecting Lorenzo to any illegal activity. But even he had to admit, though only to himself late at night in his office, that the prosecution's case was stronger than he'd initially assessed. On the morning of the 3rd day, a cold rain fell over Manhattan, turning the streets slick and gray. Inside the courthouse, Hartman called his key witness, Marcus Webb, a former associate of Lorenzo's who had agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence on unrelated charges. Webb was 42, thin, with the nervous energy of someone who knows he's crossed a line from which there's no return. He wore an ill-fitting suit that had clearly been provided by the prosecution team and kept his eyes fixed on Hartman rather than looking at Lorenzo. Mr. Webb, Hartman began after establishing the witness's background, can you describe your relationship with the defendant? I worked for Lorenzo for about 3 years, Webb said, his voice tight. Handled some of his business dealings, arranged meetings, coordinated certain transactions. And during this time, did you become aware of illegal activities? Chen rose quickly. Objection, Your Honor. Leading the witness. Sustained. Rephrase, Mr. Hartman. Mr. Webb, please describe the nature of the activities you coordinated on Mr. Vitale's behalf. Webb cleared his throat. Lorenzo had arrangements with people, business people who needed certain things handled discreetly. He'd facilitate deals, move money around, make sure things happened without attracting attention. Some of it was legitimate, sure, but a lot of it, well, it was designed to hide what was really going on. Can you provide a specific example? Yeah. In June of last year, there was a meeting at this diner in Little Italy, place called Roselli's. Lorenzo met with some people there to discuss a shipment that was coming in through the port. The shipment was labeled as olive oil and ceramics from Italy, but everyone at that meeting knew it was about moving money from Europe into accounts here in the States. Hartman nodded, letting Webb's words settle over the jury. What date was this meeting? June 15th. I remember because it was right before my daughter's birthday. And what time did this meeting take place? Started around 6 in the evening, went until maybe 8:30. How can you be certain of these details? Webb pulled out a small notebook. I kept records. Had to keep everything straight. Here, June 15th, Roselli's Diner, 6 p.m. meeting with Lorenzo and the associates from the European connections. Hartman approached the witness stand and took the notebook which had already been entered into evidence. He showed the relevant page to the jury, then returned to his questions. For the next 2 hours, Webb described meetings, conversations, and transactions that painted Lorenzo as the sophisticated head of a criminal enterprise. His testimony was detailed, specific, and devastating. Several jurors took extensive notes, their faces showing the concentration of people trying to follow complex information. During cross-examination, Chen attacked Webb's credibility, pointing out his own criminal history and the favorable plea deal he'd received in exchange for his testimony. But Webb held firm, insisting he was telling the truth because it was the right thing to do, because he wanted to make amends for his own poor choices. By the time court adjourned that afternoon, the mood in Lorenzo's camp was grim. Chen gathered his papers methodically, avoiding the questions in his client's eyes. They both knew the prosecution's case had just gotten significantly stronger. That evening in Chen's corner office with its view of the Manhattan skyline, he sat with his investigative team reviewing every aspect of Webb's testimony. The Roselli's Diner meeting is the linchpin, Chen said, loosening his tie. If we can discredit that specific incident, we can cast doubt on everything else Webb testified to. The prosecution built their timeline around it. All their other evidence connects back to what allegedly happened on June 15th. His lead investigator, Sarah Martinez, had been working the case for months. She looked up from her laptop with tired eyes. We've interviewed everyone we could find who was at that diner on June 15th. Nobody remembers seeing Lorenzo there. The staff that worked that day don't recall anything unusual. What about security cameras? The diner doesn't have any. And the ones from nearby businesses either weren't working or have already been recycled. Chen rubbed his temples, feeling the onset of a headache. There has to be something. Webb was too specific about the time and place. If he's lying, there should be evidence that contradicts his story. They worked late into the night, knowing that when court resumed in the morning, the prosecution would continue building their case, brick by brick, witness by witness, until the walls closed in completely. The fourth day of trial began with more expert testimony, more financial records, more pieces of what Hartman promised would eventually form a complete picture of criminal activity. Lorenzo sat through it all with the same impassive expression, giving nothing away to the observers who watched his every movement for signs of guilt or innocence. During the lunch recess, Chen received a call from one of his junior associates, a recent law school graduate named Tim Brennan, who'd been assigned the tedious task of tracking down every possible lead, no matter how unlikely. Mr. Chen, I think I found something. Tim's voice crackled with excitement. Remember we asked me to check social media, local news, anything that might give us information about that diner on June 15th? Yes. What did you find? There was a gas leak at Roselli's Diner on June 15th. The place had to shut down early, around 2 in the afternoon. The gas company came out and they didn't clear the building for reopening until the next morning. Chen felt his pulse quicken. Are you absolutely certain? I've got documentation. The gas company filed a service report. There are time-stamped photos posted on the diner's social media page explaining the closure to customers and— Tim paused dramatically. I found a witness who can testify to all of this. She worked at the diner that day. Who? Her name is Elena Brooks. She's a waitress there. And Mr. Chen, she's willing to testify. The courtroom buzzed with the usual pre-session energy when Judge Morrison took her seat the following morning. Hartman had indicated he had 2 more witnesses to call before resting the prosecution's case. The general assumption was that by week's end, the jury would begin deliberations. Mr. Chen, is the defense ready to proceed? Judge Morrison asked. Chen stood, and there was something different in his posture, a subtle confidence that hadn't been there the previous day. Your Honor, the defense calls Elena Brooks to the stand. A ripple of confusion passed through the courtroom. This name had not appeared on any witness list, had not been mentioned in any pretrial filings. Hartman's head snapped up from his notes, his expression darkening. Your Honor, he objected, rising quickly. This witness was not disclosed during discovery. The prosecution has had no opportunity to— Your Honor, Chen interrupted smoothly. Ms. Brooks only came to our attention yesterday evening. She possesses material evidence that directly contradicts testimony already presented. Given the fundamental importance of this evidence to my client's defense, I'm requesting the court's permission to call her as a witness. Judge Morrison frowned, clearly displeased with the procedural irregularity. Approach, she said curtly. At the bench, out of the jury's hearing, both attorneys made their arguments in urgent whispers. Hartman insisted this was a transparent attempt to ambush the prosecution. Chen argued that justice required allowing exculpatory evidence regardless of timing. Judge Morrison listened to both sides, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. Finally she spoke. I'm going to allow the witness to testify. However, Mr. Hartman, you'll have ample opportunity for cross-examination, and I'll grant you additional time to investigate any claim she makes. Proceed, but Mr. Chen, there better be substance to this. When the attorneys returned to their tables, Chen called again. The defense calls Elena Brooks. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and Elena Brooks entered. She was 24 years old, but looked younger, with dark brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and minimal makeup. She wore a navy blue dress, clearly not expensive, probably the nicest thing in her closet, and carried herself with the uncertain gait of someone who'd never been in a courtroom before and wasn't entirely sure she should be there now. Every eye in the room followed her as she walked down the center aisle toward the witness stand. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed one on the Bible and raised the other to take the oath. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Her voice was quiet but clear. She settled into the witness chair, her eyes darting nervously around the imposing courtroom, before finally settling on Chen, who offered her a reassuring nod. Ms. Brooks, Chen began gently, understanding that putting a frightened witness at ease was crucial. Please state your name and occupation for the record. My name is Elena Brooks. I'm a waitress at Roselli's Diner in Little Italy. How long have you worked there? Almost 3 years now. And you work there how many days per week? Usually 5 or 6 days, depending on the schedule. I also have another job at a convenience store in Queens, but I've been at Roselli's longer. Chen nodded, establishing her as a working-class young woman with no apparent connection to his client. Ms. Brooks, were you working at Roselli's Diner on June 15th of last year? Yes, I was scheduled for the lunch and early dinner shift that day. Can you describe what happened on June 15th? Elena took a breath, gathering herself. Around 1:30 in the afternoon, we started smelling gas. At first it was faint, but it got stronger. The manager, Mr. Caruso, called the gas company right away. They told us to evacuate the building immediately, and not to use any electrical switches or anything that might create a spark. What happened next? The gas company sent someone out. They arrived maybe 30 minutes later. They confirmed there was a leak in one of the lines in the basement. They had to shut off the gas to the whole building and said we couldn't reopen until they'd fixed it and made sure it was safe. What time did the diner close? We sent all the customers out by 2 o'clock. The gas company workers were there until almost 6 that evening making repairs, and then they had to air out the building. We didn't reopen until the next morning. Chen paused, letting the implication sink in. Ms. Brooks, to be absolutely clear, Roselli's Diner was closed from 2 p.m. on June 15th until the following morning? Yes, completely closed. Nobody was allowed inside except the gas company workers. So it would have been impossible for anyone to hold a meeting there at 6 p.m. on June 15th, as has been testified to in this court? Objection. Hartman was on his feet. Leading the witness. Sustained. Rephrase, Mr. Chen. Ms. Brooks, based on your direct knowledge, could a meeting have taken place at Roselli's Diner at 6 p.m. on June 15th? No, sir. The diner was completely closed. Nobody except the repair workers was in that building after 2 o'clock that afternoon. The courtroom erupted. Journalists frantically scribbled notes. Several jurors sat up straighter, their expressions showing renewed attention. Judge Morrison gavelled for order. Chen approached his table and picked up a folder. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence the gas company's service report for Roselli's Diner on June 15th, showing the emergency call at 1:34 p.m., and the closure order that remained in effect until the following morning. He handed copies to the court clerk, the judge, and Hartman. The prosecutor's face had gone pale as he scanned the document. I'd also like to enter these photographs, Chen continued, posted on Roselli's Diner's social media account at 2:47 p.m. on June 15th, informing customers of the emergency closure. Note the timestamp and the visible gas company vehicles in the background of the photos. More documents were distributed. The evidence was irrefutable, documented, and completely undermined the prosecution's key witness. Chen turned back to Elena. Ms. Brooks, how did you become aware that this information was relevant to this trial? Elena swallowed hard. I saw the news coverage. When I heard that someone testified about a meeting at Roselli's on June 15th at 6 p.m., I knew that was impossible. I remember that day very clearly because we lost all our tips for the dinner shift, and I needed that money. I couldn't afford to lose a day's income. Why did you come forward? Because, Elena paused, choosing her words carefully. Because I don't know anything about Mr. Vitale or what he may or may not have done, but I know what happened at the diner where I work. If someone is going to be convicted based on testimony about something that happened there, that testimony should at least be accurate about basic facts, like whether the place was even open. Her voice gained strength as she continued. My father was a prosecutor. He died 5 years ago. He always told me that justice depends on truth, not on what's convenient or what people want to believe. When I saw that testimony about the diner, I knew I had an obligation to speak up regardless of who it helps or hurts. Chen nodded solemnly. Thank you, Ms. Brooks. No further questions. Judge Morrison looked at Hartman. Cross-examination? The prosecutor stood slowly, his mind racing to salvage what he could from this disaster. He approached Elena with the demeanor of a man trying to intimidate through sheer presence. Ms. Brooks, isn't it convenient that you just happened to see news coverage of this trial, and just happened to remember these specific details from over a year ago? Elena met his gaze steadily, and something in her expression had changed. The nervousness was still there, but underneath it was something firmer, a core of determination. I remember it because it cost me money I couldn't afford to lose. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, you remember the days when you don't get paid. And you expect this court to believe you have no connection to the defendant? That you're just a concerned citizen? I'd never heard of Mr. Vitale before this trial. I don't know him, and he doesn't know me. For the first time since Elena entered the courtroom, Lorenzo allowed himself to really look at her. This young woman, this stranger, had just dismantled the prosecution's case. She had nothing to gain from testifying. In fact, she'd likely made herself a target for both federal scrutiny and potential retaliation. Yet here she sat, her voice trembling but her words firm, telling the truth simply because it was the truth. Hartman continued his cross-examination for another 20 minutes, but it was clear to everyone watching that he was flailing. Elena's testimony was backed by documentation, by physical evidence, by records that couldn't be disputed. The gas leak had happened. The diner had been closed. Marcus Webb's testimony about the June 15th meeting was impossible. When Hartman finally returned to his seat, visibly shaken, Judge Morrison called for a recess. The courtroom exploded into conversation the moment she left the bench. Lorenzo sat perfectly still as chaos swirled around him. Chen was already on his phone, calling the office to prepare motions. Reporters were rushing for the exits to file their stories. Hartman and his team were in urgent, whispered conversation, but Lorenzo's attention remained fixed on Elena Brooks as she stepped down from the witness stand. A bailiff escorted her toward a side exit, away from the press of people and questions. Just before she disappeared through the door, she glanced back once into the courtroom. Her eyes met Lorenzo's across the crowded space. The moment lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but in that brief exchange, something passed between them. An acknowledgement, a question, a connection neither could name. Then she was gone, the door closing behind her. Lorenzo turned to Chen, who was still frantically making calls and organizing papers. His attorney was already planning the next moves, preparing motions to dismiss, strategizing how to capitalize on this dramatic turn. But Lorenzo wasn't thinking about legal strategy. He was thinking about a 24-year-old waitress who'd just walked into a federal courtroom and, with a trembling voice and undeniable truth, had changed everything. "Find out everything about her," he said quietly to Marco, his most trusted associate, who sat in the row behind him. "Everything." Marco nodded, already pulling out his phone. The afternoon session was brief. Hartman requested time to investigate Elena Brooks' testimony and review the timeline of his entire case. Judge Morrison granted a 3-day recess, her expression making clear that she was not pleased with the prosecution's apparent oversight. As the courtroom emptied, Lorenzo remained seated for a long moment. Through the tall windows he could see the gray Manhattan sky, the rain still falling in steady sheets. Somewhere in this vast city, Elena Brooks had returned to her ordinary life, probably not fully understanding that her single sentence in court, her simple statement of truth, had just saved him from what had seemed like inevitable conviction. He thought about her words. Justice depends on truth, not on what's convenient or what people want to believe. Words her father, the late prosecutor, had taught her. Lorenzo had spent years in a world where truth was negotiable, where reality could be shaped by power and influence and carefully crafted narratives. But this young woman had walked into his life for just a few minutes and reminded him that some people still believed in absolute truth, in speaking up regardless of consequence, in doing what was right, simply because it was right. He stood finally, buttoning his suit jacket, preparing to face the gauntlet of reporters waiting outside. But in the back of his mind, one thought persisted. Who was Elena Brooks really? And why had she risked everything to tell the truth for a man she'd never met? As he left the courthouse into the cold October rain, Lorenzo knew with absolute certainty that this was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning. The rain continued through the night and into the next morning, turning the streets of Queens into rivers of gray water that overflowed the gutters and pooled at intersections. Elena Brooks stood at the window of her small apartment, watching the downpour and trying to ignore the knot of anxiety that had taken permanent residence in her stomach since she'd left the courthouse 2 days ago. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of a modest building on a street where the American dream came in small, affordable increments. The one-bedroom space was barely 600 square feet, a living room that doubled as a dining area, a kitchen with appliances from the 1990s, a bedroom she'd divided with a curtain so her younger brother could have some privacy when he stayed over. The furniture was a mix of secondhand finds and pieces she'd bought on clearance, but it was hers, paid for with tips and double shifts, and until 2 days ago, it had felt like a sanctuary. Now, it felt like a cage. She hadn't slept properly since the trial. Every sound in the hallway made her jump. Every car that slowed on the street below sent her pulse racing. She'd testified in federal court against a witness in a major organized crime trial. She'd inserted herself into a world she knew nothing about, driven by a principle her father had instilled in her. Truth matters, even when it's inconvenient. Her phone buzzed on the counter, another call from an unknown number. It was the 7th one that morning. She'd stopped answering after the 3rd, when a reporter from a tabloid had somehow gotten her number and wanted to know if she'd been paid to testify, if she had any relationship with Lorenzo Vitale, if she understood she might have helped free a criminal. Elena turned away from the window and began preparing for her shift at Roselli's diner. The morning routine, shower, simple makeup, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, usually centered her, gave her a sense of control over at least this small corner of her life. But today her hands shook as she applied mascara, and she had to start over twice. Her phone rang again. This time it was a number she recognized. Mr. Caruso, her manager at the diner. Elena. His voice was tight, uncomfortable. "We need to talk before your shift starts. Can you come in a half-hour early?" Her stomach dropped. "Is everything okay? Just come in early, please." The line went dead. Elena stared at her phone, dread spreading through her chest like ice water. She knew that tone. She'd heard it before, when her father died and the people who'd promised to support her mother had suddenly become too busy to return calls, when insurance companies had found creative reasons to delay payments, when the world had made it clear that justice for a dead prosecutor's family wasn't a priority. She grabbed her jacket and umbrella, locked her apartment, and headed out into the rain. Roselli's diner occupied a corner location in Little Italy, that had housed various Italian restaurants for over 80 years. The current iteration had been there for 15 years, serving classic American breakfast and lunch fare with an Italian twist: omelets with fresh mozzarella and basil, pancakes with ricotta and berries, sandwiches on bread from the bakery 2 blocks down. Elena had worked there since she was 21, right after her father's death had forced her to drop out of City College where she'd been studying criminal justice. The tips were decent, the regulars mostly kind, and Mr. Caruso had been understanding when she needed to adjust her schedule for her brother's medical appointments. But when she arrived that morning, Mr. Caruso's expression told her that understanding had its limits. He was 56, a second-generation Italian-American who'd bought the diner with money saved from 20 years of working as a chef in Manhattan restaurants. He stood behind the counter, arms crossed, looking like a man about to deliver news he didn't want to give. "Elena, sit down." She slid into a booth, her wet jacket dripping onto the vinyl seat. The diner was empty except for one cook in the back and a busboy setting up for the breakfast rush. "I saw the news, Mr. Caruso said, sitting across from her. "Everyone saw the news. You testified in that trial." "I told the truth about what happened here," Elena said quietly. "About the gas leak. About us being closed. Someone testified that a meeting happened here when the building was evacuated. That wasn't true." I know, and that's—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "That's admirable, Elena. It really is. Your father would have been proud." The past tense felt like a slap. But federal agents came by yesterday. 2 of them flashing badges, asking questions about you, about who you talked to, about whether you have any connections to organized crime figures. They talked to me, to the other staff, to regulars. They sat right there, he pointed to a booth by the window, for 3 hours just watching the place. Elena felt her face flush. "Mr. Caruso, I promise you, I don't have any connection to Lorenzo Vitale or anyone involved in that case. I just testified about what happened here, that's all." "I believe you," he said, and he sounded sincere. "But Elena, I've got a business to run. I've got customers who come here because it's comfortable, familiar, safe. Having federal agents sitting in my diner, having reporters calling asking about you, having this place associated with a mob trial." He shook his head. "It's not good for business. So what are you saying?" He couldn't meet her eyes. "I have to let you go. I'm sorry, Elena. I really am. I'll give you 2 weeks severance, more than I'm required to because you've been a good employee. But I can't have this kind of attention on the diner." Elena sat in stunned silence. She'd expected this. Some part of her had known it was coming. But the reality still hit like a physical blow. She needed this job. Between the diner and her overnight shifts at the convenience store in Queens, she barely made enough to cover rent, her brother's medical expenses that insurance didn't cover, and basic necessities. Losing either job would be devastating. Losing both would be catastrophic. "I understand," she heard herself say, though she didn't, not really. "When do you want me to leave?" "Today. I'll have your final paycheck ready this afternoon." She nodded mechanically and stood. Her legs felt unsteady, but she forced herself to walk toward the door with her head up. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break down. As she reached for the door handle, Mr. Caruso called out, "Elena, for what it's worth, you did the right thing. It's just, sometimes doing the right thing costs more than we can afford." She didn't trust herself to respond, so she just pushed through the door into the rain. Elena walked for over an hour, not caring that she was getting soaked, not caring where she was going. The rain plastered her hair to her face and seeped through her jacket until she was shivering, but the physical discomfort was almost welcome. It gave her something to feel besides the crushing weight of consequences she hadn't fully anticipated. She'd known testifying might bring attention. She'd even understood it might cause problems. But she'd convinced herself that telling the truth was worth any price. Her father had died pursuing truth and justice, and she'd inherited his belief that these things mattered more than personal convenience. Now she was unemployed, probably unemployable at any establishment that didn't want federal scrutiny, and she had no idea how she'd make next month's rent, let alone continue helping with her brother's medical bills. Her brother, David. Elena felt a new wave of panic. David was 16, a sophomore in high school, living with their Aunt Catherine in New Jersey. He'd been born with a congenital heart condition that required ongoing monitoring and medication. Their father's government insurance had covered most expenses when he was alive, but after his death they'd been shifted to a different plan with higher deductibles and copays. Elena had been supplementing what their aunt could afford, sending money every month to ensure David could see his specialists and get his medications. If she couldn't work, how would she help him? She found herself outside a small cafe near Washington Square Park. Through the steamed windows, she could see students from NYU studying, young professionals on laptops, people living normal lives where testifying in federal court wasn't even a remote possibility. Elena went inside, ordered the cheapest coffee on the menu, and claimed a table in the corner. She pulled out her phone and opened her banking app. The number staring back at her was brutal. $1,147 in checking, another $920 in savings. After rent next week, she'd have maybe $200 total to live on while she tried to find new work. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Brooks, this is Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI. We need to speak with you regarding your testimony. Please call me at your earliest convenience. Elena stared at the message, her coffee growing cold in her hands. The FBI wanted to talk to her. Of course they did. She'd just destroyed their key witnesses' credibility in a major organized crime trial. They probably thought she'd been planted by Lorenzo's people, paid off, coerced somehow. She was about to delete the message when another text arrived, this one from her aunt. Elena, David's cardiologist appointment is next Tuesday. The office called saying our insurance claim was denied and we need to pay $680 up front. Do you have it? I'm short this month because of the car repairs. I'm so sorry, honey. Elena closed her eyes, fighting back tears. $680, nearly half of what she had left. She typed back, I'll handle it, don't worry. But as she hit send, she had no idea how she'd make that promise good. That evening, Elena worked her shift at the convenience store in Queens, a 7-Eleven on a busy street where the overnight hours from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. paid an extra $1 per hour. The store was bright, sterile, and after midnight, it attracted an interesting mix of insomniacs, shift workers, and people with nowhere else to go. She restocked shelves, cleaned the coffee station, checked inventory, and tried not to think about her rapidly deteriorating situation. But around 2 in the morning, during a rare quiet moment, her phone rang with yet another unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something, intuition, desperation, or just the exhaustion of constant vigilance, made her swipe to accept. Ms. Brooks? The voice was male, cultured, with the kind of precise diction that suggested expensive education. Who is this? My name is Robert Chen. I'm Lorenzo Vitale's attorney. We met briefly at the courthouse, though we weren't introduced. Elena's grip tightened on the phone. I don't have anything more to say about the case. I testified truthfully and... I'm not calling about the case, Ms. Brooks. I'm calling because my client would like to speak with you. In person. Absolutely not. I'm not... Please, hear me out, Chen interrupted smoothly. My client understands that your testimony has likely brought unwanted attention into your life. He'd like an opportunity to thank you properly and to discuss how he might mitigate any difficulties you're experiencing as a result of coming forward. I didn't testify to get anything from him. I don't want his money or his gratitude. I understand, but Mr. Vitale is insistent. He'd like 10 minutes of your time. A conversation, nothing more. If after that you wish to have no further contact, he'll respect that completely. Elena was silent, her mind racing. Every instinct told her to refuse, to stay as far away from Lorenzo Vitale as possible. But another part of her, the desperate part that had just lost her main source of income and had no idea how to pay for her brother's medical care, wondered what he might offer. Where? She heard herself ask. There's a cafe in Midtown. Neutral, public location. Tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock. I'll text you the address. I haven't said yes. I know. But I'm hoping you'll consider it. Mr. Vitale doesn't make requests like this lightly, Ms. Brooks. He's genuinely grateful for what you did, and he's concerned about the consequences you might be facing. After a long pause, Elena said, 1 conversation, 10 minutes, and then I never want to hear from any of you again. Understood. I'll send the details. The line went dead. Elena stared at her phone, wondering what she'd just agreed to and whether her father would be ashamed of her for even considering meeting with someone like Lorenzo Vitale. But her father was dead, and she was alive, and life had a way of forcing impossible choices on people who couldn't afford the luxury of absolute principles. The cafe Chen had chosen was in Midtown, tucked between a bookstore and a boutique on a street that catered to both tourists and locals. Elena arrived 15 minutes early, her nerves stretched tight as piano wire. She dressed carefully, jeans and a simple sweater, nothing too formal or too casual. She wanted to project that she wasn't intimidated, that this was just a brief meeting she was taking out of curiosity, nothing more. But the truth was she was terrified. Inside, the cafe was warm and smelled of fresh coffee and baked goods. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. Most of the tables were occupied by people on laptops or reading, the kind of crowd that minded their own business. At exactly 3 o'clock, the door opened and Lorenzo Vitale walked in. He looked different outside the courtroom, less formal in dark jeans and a charcoal sweater under a black coat, but he still carried himself with that same presence, that quality that made people instinctively aware of him. He spotted Elena immediately and approached her table. She noticed he was alone. No attorney, no bodyguards, just him. "Ms. Brooks," he said, his voice quieter than she'd expected. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. You have 10 minutes, Elena said, keeping her voice steady. Lorenzo nodded and sat across from her. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the slight gray at his temples. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Lorenzo said, "I want to start by apologizing." That wasn't what Elena had expected. "For what?" "For the consequences you're facing because you told the truth. My attorney has kept me informed. You lost your job at the diner. The federal authorities are watching you. Your life has been disrupted because you had the courage to contradict false testimony." "I didn't testify for you," Elena said firmly. "I testified because someone lied about something that happened at my workplace. If the situation were reversed, if the lie had helped you instead of hurt you, I would have testified the same way." "I know." Lorenzo's expression was unreadable. "That's what makes your situation even more unjust. You weren't taking sides. You were simply stating facts. And now you're being punished for it." Elena shifted uncomfortably. "Why did you want to meet? If it's to offer me money as some kind of thank you, I'm not interested. What if I told you I could help you in a different way?" "What do you mean?" Lorenzo leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "Tell me about your father." Elena felt her defenses snap into place. "My father has nothing to do with this. Robert Brooks, federal prosecutor for the Southern District of New York, specialized in organized crime and corruption cases, died in a car accident 5 years ago on the Hutchinson River Parkway. The investigation concluded it was a single-vehicle accident, likely caused by driver fatigue. Case closed." Elena's blood ran cold. "How do you know all that?" "It's my business to know things, Ms. Brooks. And I know something else. You don't believe it was an accident. You have no right. Your father was working on a case involving corruption within law enforcement. He'd compiled evidence, was preparing to bring charges against several high-ranking officials. And 3 weeks before he was scheduled to present his findings to a grand jury, he died. Convenient timing, don't you think?" Elena's hands were shaking now, her coffee forgotten. "Who told you this?" "I have access to information that official channels either can't or won't acknowledge. And I know that the same network your father was investigating, the same corrupt system he was trying to expose, is part of the machinery that was trying to convict me." "That's impossible. The federal government prosecuted you. How could—" "Ms. Brooks, do you understand how organized crime actually works in a city like New York?" Lorenzo's voice was low, intense. "It's not like in the movies. It's not just criminals operating in shadows while honest law enforcement fights against them. It's far more complicated. There are arrangements, understandings, certain people in positions of authority who find it profitable to look the other way or even actively protect certain interests while targeting others." Elena wanted to argue, to deny what he was saying, but she thought about her father's increasing paranoia in the months before his death, his reluctance to discuss his work even with family, the way he'd started keeping files at home instead of at his office. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I think we can help each other. The same people who wanted your father silenced are part of the network that tried to destroy me. They used a witness who was willing to lie, Marcus Webb. They built a case on manufactured evidence and convenient testimonies. Your statement about the diner being closed destroyed their timeline, but it doesn't expose the deeper corruption. So what? You want me to help you go after these people? I'm a waitress, Mr. Vitale. Or I was until 2 days ago. I'm not an investigator or a lawyer or anything useful to you. You're your father's daughter," Lorenzo said quietly. "And I think you want the truth about what happened to him as much as I want to understand who tried to frame me and why." Elena stared at him, her mind reeling. Everything in her said this was dangerous, that getting involved with Lorenzo Vitale in any capacity was a line she shouldn't cross. But another part of her, the part that had spent 5 years wondering if her father's death was really an accident, The part that had always felt there was more to the story was desperately curious. Even if any of this is true, she said carefully, why would you help me? What do you get out of it? Information, answers, and possibly, he paused, redemption. Redemption? She caught herself. A criminal? Lorenzo finished for her. Is that what you were going to say? The federal government certainly thinks so. The federal government just tried to convict me based on false testimony from a coerced witness. Does that make them paragons of virtue? Elena had no response to that. Lorenzo continued, his voice taking on a different quality, something almost vulnerable. My sister died 6 years ago. She was 23, a student at Columbia. She got involved with people she shouldn't have, started using substances she couldn't handle. By the time my family realized how bad it had gotten, it was too late. She overdosed in an apartment in Hell's Kitchen. He paused, and Elena could see genuine pain in his eyes. The people who supplied her, who enabled her destruction, they were protected by the same corrupt network that's been operating in this city for decades. When I tried to find justice for her through legal channels, I hit walls at every turn. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses recanted. Cases were dropped. I learned that in some situations, the system isn't designed to deliver justice. It's designed to protect those who've learned to work it. So you became one of them? Elena asked, her voice softer now. I became someone who understood how the game is really played. And yes, I've made choices I'm not proud of. But I've also never forgotten what it feels like to be powerless in the face of systemic corruption. That's why I understand your situation, Ms. Brooks. You told the truth, and the system is punishing you for it. Elena was silent for a long moment, processing everything. Finally, she asked, what exactly are you proposing? I have resources and connections you don't have. I can access information about your father's case, about the people involved, about what he was really investigating. In exchange, you help me understand the network that tried to destroy me, because I believe your father's investigation and my prosecution are connected. And if I refuse, then I respect your decision, and we never speak again. But Ms. Brooks, right now you have no job, federal agents looking at you with suspicion, and a brother who needs medical care you can't afford. I'm offering you a way forward, not out of charity, but because I think we can both get something we need. Elena thought about David's upcoming appointment, about the $680 she didn't have, about the rent due in 10 days, about 5 years of questions that had never been answered about her father's death. This conversation stays between us, she said finally. No one else knows. If I feel at any point that I'm being used or manipulated, I walk away, and you never contact me or my family again. Agreed. And I want to be clear. I don't work for you. This isn't employment. If we do this, we're sharing information, that's all. Understood. Elena took a deep breath. She was probably making a terrible mistake. Every rational part of her brain screamed that she should walk away, report this conversation to the FBI, and have nothing more to do with Lorenzo Vitale. But she thought about her father, about his dedication to truth and justice, about the case that might have cost him his life, and she thought about how the system he'd served had abandoned his family after his death, how justice and truth had become abstract concepts that didn't help pay bills or answer questions. I want to see what you have on my father's case, she said. Everything. Lorenzo nodded and pulled out his phone. He typed quickly, then showed her the screen. It displayed what looked like a scanned case file, complete with official letterheads and documentation. This is from your father's final case, the one he was working on when he died. Read the names of the people he was investigating. Elena scanned the document and her breath caught. There, among the list of officials under investigation, was a name that would later become all too familiar. David Hartman, then a rising star in the U.S. Attorney's Office. That's... She couldn't finish the sentence. The same prosecutor who just tried to convict me, Lorenzo confirmed. And now you understand why I think our situations are more connected than coincidence would suggest. Elena looked up from the phone, her world tilting on its axis. Everything she thought she understood about her father's death, about the trial, about the nature of justice and corruption in her city, it was all suddenly far more complicated than she'd imagined. Where did you get this? I have people who can access things that aren't supposed to be accessible. Before you ask, yes, they're breaking laws to do it. But sometimes the only way to uncover truth that powerful people want buried is to dig in places you're not supposed to dig. Elena knew she should be appalled. Instead, She felt a strange sense of clarity. For 5 years she'd accepted the official story of her father's death because she had no way to challenge it, no resources to investigate, no proof that things were other than they seemed. Now, sitting across from a man the government had tried to imprison, she was being offered exactly what she'd never thought she'd have: answers. "I need time to think about this," she said. "Of course. But Ms. Brooks," Lorenzo's expression grew serious, "now that you know what I've shown you, you need to be careful. The people involved in this don't take kindly to anyone asking questions. Your father learned that. I learned that. And now, whether you work with me or not, you've become visible to them. Is that a threat? It's a warning, and it's why I think your safest course of action is to accept my help. I can provide protection and resources. Alone, you're vulnerable." Elena stood up, needing to leave, to process all of this in private. "I'll think about it. That's all I can promise right now." Lorenzo stood as well. "Take my number. Call me anytime, day or night. If you need anything, and I mean anything from help with your brother's medical bills to just someone to talk to about all of this, call me." He handed her a card with a single phone number printed on it. Nothing else. Elena took it reluctantly and slipped it into her pocket. As she turned to leave, Lorenzo said one more thing. "Your father was a brave man, Ms. Brooks. He stood up to people he knew were dangerous because he believed in justice. You inherited that courage. But courage without strategy is just martyrdom. Let me help you be smart as well as brave." Elena left without responding, pushing out into the cold afternoon air. She walked for blocks without really seeing where she was going, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. She'd gone to that meeting expecting, what? A payoff? A threat? Some kind of manipulation? Instead, she'd gotten something far more dangerous. Information that changed everything she thought she knew, and an offer of alliance from someone who should have been her enemy. When she finally made it back to her apartment that evening, she found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was $680 in cash and a note in neat handwriting. "For your brother's appointment. Consider it payment for the truth you told in court. No obligation, no strings. LV." Elena stared at the money, emotions warring inside her. Pride told her to return it immediately. Practicality reminded her that David needed to see his cardiologist, that their aunt was counting on her, that refusing help because of principle wouldn't keep her brother healthy. She thought about what Lorenzo had said. Courage without strategy is just martyrdom. With shaking hands, she pulled out her phone and texted her aunt, "Just sent the money for David's appointment. He's all set for Tuesday." Then she sat down at her small kitchen table, pulled out the card Lorenzo had given her, and stared at the phone number for a long time. She didn't call, not that night, but she kept the card, and she kept the money. And she kept thinking about her father's case file and the name David Hartman on a list of corrupt officials. Somewhere in this city, the truth about her father's death existed, and for the first time in 5 years, Elena had a path, however dangerous, however morally complicated, toward finding it. Outside her window, night fell over Queens. The rain had finally stopped, but the streets still gleamed with reflected light, and the city hummed with the endless energy of 8 million lives intersecting in ways visible and invisible. Elena Brooks had told the truth in a courtroom, and that single act of honesty had set in motion consequences she was only beginning to understand. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Brooks, this is Agent Chen again. We really need to speak with you. Please contact me as soon as possible." Elena deleted the message without responding. She had a feeling that when she finally did talk to the FBI, she'd have a lot more questions for them than they had for her. But first, she needed to understand exactly what her father had been investigating, who wanted him dead, and how it all connected to Lorenzo Vitale's prosecution. And whether she liked it or not, there was only one person who could help her find those answers. She picked up Lorenzo's card one more time, tracing the embossed numbers with her finger. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she would call. Tonight, she would allow herself to grieve for the simple life she'd had just 1 week ago, before she'd walked into a federal courtroom and spoken a single sentence that had changed everything. Elena called Lorenzo the next morning at precisely 9 o'clock, before she could talk herself out of it. He answered on the second ring. "Ms. Brooks, I want to see everything you have on my father's case," she said without preamble. "Every document, every piece of information, and I want to understand exactly how it connects to your trial. I can arrange that. When are you available?" "Today. Now. I don't have a job anymore, remember?" There was a pause, and she thought she detected something like respect in his voice when he replied. I'll send a car to pick you up. 1 hour. No cars, I'll take the subway. Just tell me where to meet you. Lorenzo gave her an address in Brooklyn, a commercial building in an industrial area near the waterfront. It's one of my legitimate businesses, an import company. We'll have privacy there to review everything. After hanging up, Elena stood in her apartment, second-guessing every decision that had led her to this moment. But then she thought about her father's funeral, about the questions no one would answer, about the way official investigations had simply stopped, and her resolve hardened. She dressed in jeans and a warm sweater, pulled her hair back, and headed out into the November morning. The building Lorenzo had directed her to was a 3-story structure of red brick and large industrial windows, situated among warehouses and distribution centers. A discreet sign by the entrance read, Vitale Import Company. The area was quiet on a Saturday morning, with only a few cars parked on the street and the distant sound of container ships on the East River. Elena hesitated at the entrance, her hand on the door handle. This was the point of no return. Once she walked through this door, she was choosing to align herself, however temporarily, with someone the federal government considered a criminal. But she'd already crossed that line the moment she'd accepted his money for David's medical appointment. She pushed the door open. The lobby was surprisingly professional. Polished concrete floors, modern lighting, framed photographs of Italian landscapes on the walls. A reception desk sat empty, but before Elena could wonder where to go, a door to her left opened. Lorenzo appeared, dressed casually in dark pants and a gray sweater. Ms. Brooks, thank you for coming. He led her through a corridor lined with offices, most dark and empty on the weekend, and up a flight of stairs to the 3rd floor. Here, the space opened into what appeared to be a private office suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the waterfront. Coffee? Lorenzo asked, gesturing to a machine in the corner. I'm fine, thank you. Another man was already in the room, standing by the windows. He was older than Lorenzo, perhaps mid-40s, with graying hair and the alert, watchful eyes of someone accustomed to evaluating threats. He turned as they entered, his expression neutral but unmistakably skeptical. Ms. Brooks, this is Marco Rossini. He's been my most trusted advisor for 15 years. Everything I know about your father's case he knows as well. Marco nodded curtly but didn't offer his hand. Ms. Brooks, Marco isn't convinced this is a good idea, Lorenzo said with characteristic directness. He thinks involving you creates unnecessary risks. He's probably right, Elena said, meeting Marco's gaze. But I'm here anyway. Marco's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, perhaps grudging respect. You understand that what we're about to show you is highly sensitive? That possessing this information could make you a target? I'm already a target. The FBI has been calling me constantly. I lost my job. People look at me like I'm either a criminal or an idiot for testifying. So whatever risks you're worried about, I'm already living them. Lorenzo gestured to a large table where several folders and a laptop were arranged. Let's start with what happened 5 years ago. For the next hour, Elena immersed herself in her father's final case. Lorenzo had somehow obtained copies of files that should have been sealed, locked away in federal archives accessible only to authorized personnel. There were investigation notes, surveillance photos, financial records, and most chilling of all, her father's own handwritten observations. Robert Brooks had been investigating a corruption network that operated at the intersection of law enforcement, organized crime, and legitimate business. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity. Certain officials in the U.S. Attorney's Office and NYPD selectively prosecuted some criminal enterprises while protecting others. The protected groups paid for this privilege through various laundering schemes that made the money appear legitimate. Your father had identified at least 7 officials involved, Lorenzo explained, pointing to a list of names. David Hartman, who prosecuted me, was among them, but he wasn't the highest-ranking participant. He answered to others. Elena studied the names, some of which she vaguely recognized from news coverage over the years. How did my father even discover this? He was investigating what appeared to be a straightforward case involving financial irregularities at a construction company. But as he dug deeper, he realized the irregularities were actually part of a sophisticated money laundering operation. And when he tried to follow the money trail, he kept running into dead ends. Investigations that were mysteriously shut down, evidence that disappeared, witnesses who suddenly refused to cooperate. Marco leaned against the table. Your father was smart enough to realize he couldn't pursue this through normal channels. If he brought it to his superiors, there was a good chance he'd be alerting the very people involved. So he started building his case quietly, documenting everything, preparing to go directly to the Attorney General's office when he had irrefutable proof. But he died before he could do that, Elena said quietly. The official report says he fell asleep at the wheel on the Hutchinson River Parkway, Lorenzo said. Single vehicle accident, no witnesses, no evidence of foul play. The investigation lasted less than a week before being ruled accidental death. Elena had read that report dozens of times over the years, searching for inconsistencies, for anything that didn't fit. My father never fell asleep driving. He was meticulous about that. If he was tired, he'd pull over, get coffee, walk around. And he was driving home from work at 6 in the evening, not late at night after a long shift. We know, Marco said, which is why we believe it wasn't an accident. Elena looked up sharply. Do you have proof? Not the kind that would hold up in court, Lorenzo admitted. But we have information from someone who was close to the situation, a detective who worked with the officers who investigated your father's death. He opened the laptop and pulled up a video file. This man approached me 6 months ago. He's dying, wants to clear his conscience about things he's done. He told me about your father's case. Lorenzo pressed play. On the screen, an older man appeared. Weathered face, gray hair, the tired eyes of someone carrying heavy burdens. The timestamp showed the video was recorded 3 months ago. My name is James Corrigan, the man on the screen said, his voice rough. I was a detective with NYPD for 32 years, and I've done things I'm not proud of, things that haunt me now that I'm facing my own mortality. Elena leaned closer to the screen, her heart pounding. In May 5 years ago, I was approached by people I'd worked with before. People connected to the network that ran certain operations in the city. They told me there was a federal prosecutor who was getting too close to information he shouldn't have. They asked me to handle the situation. Corrigan paused, his expression pained. I'd done jobs for them before, made evidence disappear, convinced witnesses to change their stories, steered investigations away from certain conclusions. But they'd never asked me to. I told them I wouldn't do it, told them to find someone else. Elena felt her hands begin to shake. But they said if I didn't help, they'd make sure my daughter, my Katie, who was in her last year at NYU, would have an accident. So I agreed to help, but I drew a line. I told them I wouldn't be directly involved in anyone's death. Instead, I made sure that when it happened, it would look clean, accidental. I handled the investigation, made sure no questions were asked, made sure the case was closed quickly. The man on the screen looked directly into the camera, his eyes wet. Robert Brooks died because I was a coward, because I valued my daughter's life over his, over justice, over everything I swore to uphold when I became a cop. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want the truth known, and I want his family to understand that he was murdered because he was getting close to exposing corruption that went all the way to the top. The video ended. Elena sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, Lorenzo said quietly. I know this is difficult to hear. Where is he? Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. This Detective Corrigan? He's in hospice care in New Jersey. Pancreatic cancer. The doctors give him maybe 2 months. Elena wiped her eyes, her grief rapidly transforming into something harder, more focused. I want to talk to him. I need to hear him say this to my face. We can arrange that, Marco said. But you need to understand. His confession is worthless legally. He was coerced, he didn't directly participate, and he has no physical evidence. It wouldn't be admissible in court, and even if it were, it wouldn't be enough to prosecute the people actually responsible. Then what good is it? Elena demanded. Lorenzo closed the laptop. It's a piece of the puzzle, and combined with other pieces, your father's original investigation notes, financial records we've obtained, testimony from others who've been part of this system, it starts to paint a complete picture. A picture of what? Of exactly how this corruption network operates, who's involved, and how they've been protecting themselves for decades. Your father was trying to build this case 5 years ago. We can finish what he started. Elena stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the gray water of the East River. Container ships moved slowly in the distance, and she could see the Manhattan skyline across the water. Somewhere in that city, the people responsible for her father's death were living their lives, comfortable and protected. Why do you care about this? She asked without turning around. You said your trial and my father's investigation are connected, but I still don't understand how. Lorenzo joined her at the window. The same network your father was investigating has been protecting my rivals, the Castillo organization. They've been paying off officials, ensuring their operations run smoothly while putting pressure on anyone who doesn't cooperate. 3 years ago, I refused to pay their tribute, refused to operate under their system. That made me a problem. So they came after you. They built a case using manufactured evidence, a coerced witness in Marcus Webb, and the prosecutorial power of David Hartman. If your testimony hadn't destroyed their timeline, I'd be in federal prison right now, and the Castillos would have absorbed my legitimate businesses as part of their empire. Elena turned to face him. And you're telling me you're completely innocent? That you've never done anything illegal? Lorenzo's expression was unreadable. I'm telling you that whatever I may or may not have done in the past, the case against me was built on lies, and that the system that was supposed to deliver justice is actually being used to eliminate competition and protect those who've learned to corrupt it. That's not really an answer. No, Lorenzo agreed. It's not, but it's the only answer I can give you right now. What matters is that we have a common interest, exposing the people who killed your father and who tried to destroy me. Whether you trust my motives or not, we can both benefit from working together. Marco's phone rang. He stepped away to answer it, his voice low. When he returned a moment later, his expression was grim. We have a problem. Our contact at the records department just called. Someone accessed Robert Brooks's case files yesterday, not through official channels but using administrative credentials that shouldn't exist anymore. Whoever did it triggered an alert our friend monitors. Who would be accessing my father's case files now? Elena asked. Someone who knows we're looking into this, Lorenzo said. Someone who wants to know what information we're accessing. Or someone who wants to know what information still exists, Marco added. If they're checking to see whether certain documents survived the original purge, that means they're worried about what might surface. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Are you saying they know about me? About what we're doing? It's possible. Or they could just be doing routine monitoring, checking periodically to ensure old threats stay buried. Lorenzo's expression was serious. But we need to assume the worst. Marco, increase security protocols. I want to know immediately if anyone shows unusual interest in Ms. Brooks or her family. Already on it. Elena's mind raced to her brother. David, my brother. If these people are as dangerous as you say, we'll make sure he's protected, Lorenzo said firmly. I'll have people watching your aunt's house in New Jersey. They won't be obvious, won't interfere, but they'll be there. I can't ask you to. You're not asking, I'm offering. Your brother's safety is non-negotiable if we're going to continue this investigation. Marco looked uncomfortable with Lorenzo's decisiveness, but he didn't argue. Instead, he pulled out his own phone and began making calls, stepping out of the office to speak privately. Elena sank into a chair, the enormity of the situation pressing down on her. This is insane. A week ago, my biggest worry was making rent and covering my brother's co-pays. Now I'm involved in some conspiracy involving corruption and murder, and people I don't even know might be watching me. Lorenzo sat across from her, his posture relaxed but his eyes intense. You can still walk away. I meant what I said before. If you want out, if this is too much, I'll understand. I'll still make sure your brother stays safe, and I'll still provide financial support until you can find new employment. No obligations. Why would you do that? If I walk away, you lose your connection to my father's investigation. Because despite what the government wants people to believe about me, I'm not a monster. You told the truth in that courtroom at great personal cost. That means something to me. And I don't punish people for making rational decisions about their own safety. Elena studied his face, trying to reconcile the man sitting across from her with the image the media had painted. A cold, calculating criminal mastermind. What she saw instead was someone who seemed genuinely troubled by her situation, who spoke about honor and principles, even while acknowledging his own moral compromises. Tell me about your sister, she said suddenly. Lorenzo's expression shifted, a flash of pain crossing his features. Why? Because you said this is partly about her. Because I want to understand who I'm dealing with. For a long moment, Lorenzo was silent. Then he stood and walked to a bookshelf in the corner of the office. He pulled out a photo frame and handed it to Elena. The picture showed a young woman, perhaps 21 or 22, with long dark hair and Lorenzo's same intense eyes. She was laughing, caught mid-motion at what looked like a family gathering, her whole face lit with joy. Her name was Sophia, Lorenzo said quietly. She was my baby sister, 10 years younger than me. Smart, ambitious, wanted to be a doctor. She got into Columbia on a full scholarship. He took the photo back, looking at it with an expression of profound sadness. I was so proud of her. Our family wasn't wealthy. My father worked construction. My mother cleaned houses. Sophia getting into Columbia felt like proof that we could rise above our circumstances through hard work and talent. What happened? She got involved with people at school, started going to parties, meeting individuals who had money, status, access to things a girl from our neighborhood had never seen before. At first it seemed harmless. She was just enjoying college life. But then the substances entered the picture. Lorenzo returned the photo to the shelf. By the time we realized how serious it had gotten, she was already addicted. We tried everything. Rehab programs, interventions, moving her back home. Nothing worked. The people who'd introduced her to that lifestyle kept pulling her back in. And 6 years ago I got a call from the police. They'd found her in an apartment in Hell's Kitchen. She'd been gone for 3 days before anyone even knew she was dead. "I'm sorry," Elena said softly. The people who supplied her, who enabled her destruction, they were protected. I tried going through legal channels, tried to get the police to investigate, to bring charges, but evidence disappeared. Witnesses refused to cooperate. The case just evaporated. That's when I learned how the system really works in this city, how certain people are above the law, because they've learned to work the machinery from the inside. He turned back to Elena. "So yes, this is personal for me. It's about exposing the corruption that protects predators while honest people like your father get silenced for trying to bring that corruption to light. If that makes me a hypocrite, someone tainted by his own criminal associations pursuing justice, I accept that judgment. But it doesn't make the goal any less important." Elena felt her perspective shifting. Lorenzo Vitale wasn't a simple villain or hero. He was something more complex. A man shaped by tragedy and system failures, who'd responded by entering a world he couldn't fully escape from, and who now saw a chance at something resembling redemption. "My father used to say that the most dangerous criminals aren't the ones who break laws out of desperation or passion," she said. "They're the ones who corrupt the law itself, who twist justice into a weapon they can use against their enemies." He said that kind of corruption was like a cancer, spreading through the entire system until you couldn't tell the disease from the healthy tissue anymore. "He was right," Lorenzo said. "And that's what we're dealing with. Not just individual corrupt officials, but a systemic rot that's been growing for decades." Marco returned to the office. "Security team is in place around your aunt's house. They'll maintain a perimeter, stay invisible. And I've got someone monitoring electronic surveillance on Ms. Brooks. If anyone starts tracking her phone or credit cards, we'll know." "Thank you," Elena said, feeling strange gratitude toward someone who clearly didn't trust her. "Don't thank me yet," Marco replied. "This is just the beginning. If we're really going to expose this network, we need more than Detective Corrigan's deathbed confession and your father's old case files. We need current evidence, proof that the corruption is still active. And we need to understand the full scope," Lorenzo added. "How many officials are involved? How the money flows? What operations they're currently protecting? Your father was building that picture 5 years ago, but the network has evolved since then." Elena felt a spark of her father's investigative instinct igniting within her. "My father was meticulous about documentation. He wouldn't have kept everything at his office where it could be discovered. He must have had a backup somewhere he felt was safe." "You think he might have hidden evidence?" Marco asked skeptically. "And that it survived 5 years without being found? He grew up in a time before cloud storage, when important documents were kept in physical form. And I remember—" Elena paused, a memory surfacing. "About a month before he died, he mentioned getting a safety deposit box. He said something about keeping certain important documents secure. At the time I thought he meant family papers, birth certificates, that kind of thing. But what if—" Lorenzo leaned forward. "Do you know which bank?" "He used Chase. There was a branch near his office in Lower Manhattan where he did all his banking. Do you have access to his accounts? Any paperwork from the estate?" "My mother handled all of that after he died. Elena's voice caught. "She passed away 2 years ago. Cancer. But her sister, my Aunt Catherine, has all the important papers stored in her house. That's where David and I found my father's old case files when we were cleaning out Mom's things. We need to see if there's any record of a safety deposit box," Marco said. "If your father did hide evidence and if it's still there, it could be exactly what we need." Elena pulled out her phone. "I'll call my aunt, see if she still has the estate paperwork." The conversation was brief. Aunt Catherine did have boxes of documents in her garage. She'd been meaning to go through them but hadn't gotten around to it. Elena said she wanted to look through her father's papers for personal reasons, and her aunt readily agreed to let her come by the next day. After ending the call, Elena looked at Lorenzo and Marco. Tomorrow I can drive out to my aunt's place in New Jersey. If there's documentation about a safety deposit box, I'll find it. I'll go with you, Lorenzo said. That's not necessary. It's absolutely necessary. If we're right about someone monitoring your father's case, there's a good chance they're also watching for any renewed interest from his family. You showing up suddenly to dig through old documents could trigger exactly the kind of attention we don't want. And you think you being there will help? A known criminal accompanying the daughter of a dead prosecutor. I think having backup nearby if something goes wrong is smarter than you going alone and vulnerable. Lorenzo's tone left no room for argument. We'll take separate vehicles. You'll visit your aunt as planned. I'll stay out of sight but close enough to respond if needed. Elena wanted to argue, but she couldn't deny the logic. If she was really stepping into dangerous territory, investigating her father's murder, pursuing evidence that powerful people had killed to suppress, then having someone watching her back made sense, even if that someone had his own questionable background. Fine, she said, but we do this my way. I talk to my aunt alone, I handle the documents, and you stay hidden unless there's an actual problem. Agreed. They spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing more of Robert Brooks's case files. Elena read her father's notes, his observations about the people he was investigating, his carefully documented evidence of corruption. It was painful seeing his handwriting again, knowing these documents represented his final work, the case that had likely cost him his life. But it was also strangely comforting. In these pages, her father was still present, his methodical thinking, his commitment to justice, his refusal to look away from difficult truths. He'd known the risks. The notes made that clear. But he'd pursued the investigation anyway because he believed it mattered. As evening approached, Lorenzo arranged for a car service to take Elena back to Queens. Before she left, he handed her a phone, a simple prepaid device. Use this for any communication about the investigation, he said. Your regular phone could be monitored. This one is clean, encrypted, and untraceable. Elena took the phone, adding it to her growing collection of things that marked her new reality. Evidence files, contact information for people she shouldn't trust, and now a burner phone like something out of a crime drama. Tomorrow, Lorenzo said as she prepared to leave, we find out if your father left us a map to follow. The safety deposit box contained everything Robert Brooks had hidden: recordings, documents, proof of the corruption network. Detective Corrigan met with Elena and Lorenzo, providing his full testimony despite knowing it meant exposing his own crimes. With the evidence compiled, they approached the U.S. Attorney General's office through trusted channels. The investigation moved swiftly. David Hartman and 6 other officials were arrested in coordinated raids. The Castillo organization's protection evaporated overnight, but victory came with costs. Elena testified before a grand jury, reliving her father's final investigation. The media scrutiny was intense, her privacy shattered. Lorenzo faced his own reckoning. While cleared of the fabricated charges, he couldn't escape his past entirely. 3 months later, Elena visited Rosselli's diner one last time. Lorenzo was there, as if by coincidence. You did it, he said quietly. Your father would be proud. We did it, Elena corrected. She'd been accepted back to college, studying criminal justice again. David's medical bills were covered by the compensation fund. Lorenzo stood to leave. Different worlds, Ms. Brooks. Different paths, she agreed. But thank you. He walked away, choosing legitimacy over his former life. Elena watched him go, knowing some debts couldn't be measured. Some alliances defied simple judgment. Truth had won, but freedom, she'd learned, always carried a price.